More bad news with the weather. Those of you online can't see, but New England was terrible the last few days. I brought this up yesterday. I think we got a little bit of sun today. It looked like it peaked for a minute, but it was raining and storming and everything else. So Dr. Jontel White from the Shop Foundation will not make it, sadly, but we hope we can be in touch with her in the future. We do, however, have Steve Plank, the Vice President of Research, Evaluation, Evidence, and Data at the Annie Casey Foundation, and also Chloe Cockburn, CEO of Just Impact Advisors. They will both be speaking today, and I've asked them to give talks about what their work is on, what their major initiatives are, and any potential collaborative spaces that they have garnered from spending a day and a half with us. They are not used to, I think Chloe said yesterday, she hasn't been back to school in a while, and she feels more than well caught up right now. So thank everybody for hanging around this long, and I'm going to have Chloe come up first, and then we'll have Steve. So thank you guys for your attention.
Okay. Cool. Hi, everyone. It's been lovely to meet some of you over the past few days. My name's Chloe Cockburn. It's from Scotland. Don't pronounce the middle. So yeah, it's been interesting to be here with you all. Actually, I'm going to start my timer so I know what's going on here. Hang on. Boom. And we're coming from a very different perspective in here, so it's been really fascinating to hear about all your research. And then what I'm going to try and do is just share a little bit about who I am and how I do the work in the land that I am in, which is social justice philanthropy, a particular corner of philanthropy, and then share some reflections and some ideas that might potentially be useful to you all. And then, of course, happy to answer questions or talk after, whatever's useful. So first, to introduce a little bit about me, I come from a family of journalists. These are all books by my family. There's my grandfather, who was a communist journalist in the 30s, 40s, 50s in Ireland and England. That's my mom, Leslie, writing about drug war in Colombia. This is my dad, Andrew Cockburn, talking about military-industrial complex, and this is my uncle, Alexander Cockburn, also talking about the drug war. So these are the sort of politics that I grew up in and is part of how I ended up here today. My dad's from Ireland. That's a picture that I took, and that sort of grounds a lot of my politics as well, colonial history, revolutionary politics. I'm a lawyer by training. That's a couple of the places that I've worked, a civil rights law firm, ACLU. I spent 6 years at Open Philanthropy. That's how I came into funding. This is a funding vehicle working with Dustin Moskovitz and Carrie Tuna. He's a co-founder of Facebook. So I came out of the ACLU and worked with them for 6 years to give away about $150 million for them, and then formed a lot of relationships with other donors, ended up spinning out in 2022. I got a grant from Open Phil and doing what I'm now leading, which is Just Impact. So what I do now is 4 kind of categories of things: fund, advise, educate, strategize, like I'd like to say. So the fund is it's what we call an intermediary fund, where I raise money into the fund, C3 and C4 dollars, and then C4 is political money, and give that away to various different categories I'll go into in a minute, but a huge emphasis on organizing, campaigns, political work, power building work, big emphasis on funding directly impacted leadership, not from an ethical position, but from a strategic position, because as I think, based on what I've heard in the past day and a half, people here recognize there's a lot of knowledge and strategic power in communities most impacted, and getting dollars to them really helps advance that work. I advise donors that come to me for advice on various questions. I also publish regular memos and a Substack. I'll have the link at the end in case that interests you, where I'm trying to sort of gather and synthesize ideas and push them out to people who might be listening to what I have to say. My main audience being other people in philanthropy. So I speak in a very opinionated way to them. That's not necessarily how I would speak in public, but But to my colleagues in philanthropy, I'm trying to sort of, again, synthesize and shape ideas and give them a sense of at least where I and people in the field together with whom I'm thinking, where we think the work really is, and therefore, excuse me, don't really stand up in front of people a lot, so I'm a little trembly, how we can most strategically fund that work. I spend a lot of time educating donors, and then I do spend some amount of time educating people who are seeking funds on how to go about that. And then there's the strategize piece. I draw a lot on the work for strategy from Carlos Saavedra from the INE Institute. I'm Paul Engler for the Center for Working Poor, and I'm going to share some things that I've learned from them that really shape how I approach the work. So the main kind of theory of change that I have in terms of determining funding at the broadest level is how to open more political space for reform, because reform change, the transformations that we're trying to seek, meaning that if there's very little political room to act, the people who want to help you feel like they can't, and the people who are opposing you feel like, you're sort of getting hit from both ends. So I like to think of opening that space, increasing the political incentives to do what seems like a good idea. And there are a lot of different ways to go about that, but that's the main kind of a way of kind of conceptualizing the action here. I think a lot in terms of movement ecology, and that sort of shapes and this is again a framework from the INE Institute, shapes how I think about where to locate the funding. So we are sitting in the inside game right now by definition in the academy. When I first came into funding in 2015, a lot of the work in criminal justice was really inside game work, policy, advocacy, research into sort of data, statistics, things like that. I focused a lot of resources on structure-based organizing, community organizing, directly impacted-led organizing, and then also more recently into alternatives. There's a whole report on this called Funding Social Movements that lays out sort of different components of movement ecology in case that interests anyone. And then I also think a lot in terms of seasons of movement, by which I mean these sort of, again, this comes from INE, and that's Carlos's email in case this fascinates you and you want to contact him. But there's sort of spring being an early time where there's a lot of new organizations forming, potentially things can happen. Summer, there's a lot of energy in the system, a lot of attention being paid to the issue. Fall, things are starting to disintegrate. It's getting a little bumpy. You may have a harvest, a policy harvest in terms of people being polarized and mobilized to sort of pressed into meeting certain demands, and a winter being like a more difficult time, which is where I kind of think we are right now in criminal justice in some ways, so I think it's a warm winter. And here's another way of visualizing this sort of movement cycle in terms of the kind of energy and momentum going on. And this, again, is from INE. You can see how strongly I draw from their work. And a lot of the strategic work goes into thinking about, well, where are we in this cycle really? Because you could have a cool day in summer, so to speak. I think it's pretty clear that we are past, summer was 2020. There's never been such an explosion of energy on this issue. But where are we in terms of the fall and the winter? I kind of think we're in winter right now. Maybe we're in fall, but there's something that can happen in that time. And I could speak more about this after, but is this perception of failure after the big energy and momentum is gone. People think like, oh, no one cares anymore, we're not in it, but that's actually a really important time to analyze and assess the institutional progress, the leadership development progress, what has been built in order to start the next cycle, hopefully at a higher point than the last time, because you're trying to kind of build on where you were before. And I think there's actually room for the types of research that happens in this room to assist in understanding the nature of what has already occurred in order to build on it. So that's like a really quick trot through some of the sort of theoretical frameworks that I use in determining the funding. Okay, so now I'm going to shift to some hopefully helpful comments that could be useful to you all. In terms of I mentioned that I come from social justice philanthropy. In thinking last night, I was really listening all day yesterday and trying to figure out what I could say that could be helpful. This isn't deeply produced work or anything, so I'm not holding onto it too tightly. But I think that a lot of you may have experience raising funding from research funders who are like, I love research, let's know things, you produce knowledge, let's give you money for that. I don't come from that space, and I don't really understand or know the dynamics of how it works, so I can't give you very much there. I'm going to speak a little bit more about the social justice funders who have a strategy, meaning a set of goals, a place they're trying to get, and where your work might be relevant to that. That might be an opening for getting funding, and I'll come back to that. And then individual donors who are, like less strategic maybe, but who might encounter on a more personal level you and your work. Like if you were to give a talk that they saw, and they might just like fall in love with it and sort of in a kind of somewhat more erratic, less strategic way, decide to get engaged with your work. And so one aspect that I'll come back to in a minute briefly is around like how to make yourself more visible out to the outside world, because that's maybe where you could catch some of those people. Okay, so for social justice funders, most of us, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but my impression is that we don't really know about research in academia. Like we don't really know. I didn't know anyone in this room before I came here. I think a lot of my colleagues are in a similar position. So there's not really much to hold on to. There's like whole levels of stuff that we don't understand, and so I think it can be hard to communicate across that chasm. So that's one point that is perhaps a challenge. We don't need to be convinced that it's a bad situation. So knowledge production that's around saying like, there are lots of problems. I think we'd be like, yep, that is true. We know that, we want to do something about it. And related to that, I think that I was speaking with one of your colleagues yesterday about an insight that what it may be the case that what it takes to get published is not the same as what it takes to get funded. So in terms of interesting, fascinating research, okay, like because we have no handles, we don't even know what's going on in research, that's not going to be like something that's a big get for us. But we're trying to achieve goals like passing a good policy. And so if your work can help move us towards that goal, that could be really interesting. So for example, is your work going to better equip organizers to make their case? Can you do work that helps engage more constituencies? I heard about religion yesterday, for example. Maybe there's faith constituencies who might hear that, understand that, and want to like participate because they felt like their interests were at stake. Or labor, we heard about yesterday as well. Students, how can we use your work? And I want to acknowledge here that like making work useful is like a particular condition of the sort of society that we live in. I don't I don't celebrate that, but I do think if you're practically trying to figure out how to access funding, you want to think about where do I fit in a larger strategy or an ecosystem of work that I can be contributing towards, and that the funders could understand that the goals of the people they're funding really already can be better served if your work is in the mix. I also want to say that, you have this separate role of engaging with students, which is really exciting because like I met Sarah yesterday and a couple of other students. That's exciting because we're kind of far removed from that, and the power and energy of students engaged on a topic who are working with you all, that seems kind of cool and even sort of separate from the particular aspects of the research. So I had some suggestions that I brainstormed yesterday. One is that, again, funders, particularly social justice funders, are already funding bodies of work. I mentioned to one of your colleagues today, SE Justice Group, who works with women with incarcerated loved ones. Gina who runs that organization, is well known to a lot of us funders. So if you know Gina, and Gina tells us, hey, this person's work could be really helpful towards our goals, that's a very useful boost. Now, if Gina came to me and said, could you consider funding this particular research, it would really help me, that would mean a lot to me. And so thinking that's a sort of aspect of getting to know the field, not just in a collegial way, but to think about who is going to get you closer towards your goal of having a funder know about and understand and be excited about your work. Second would be producing sort of assets. I want to say there's a lot that you probably know that you can just offhand kind of say because you've read 80,000 books and you can just kind of synthesize that. There's stuff there that I think can be really valuable to us in terms of understanding us and the field more broadly, understanding where we are. And I'll come back to some kind of suggestions on that. But I think there's things that might be come easily to you, but will be valuable to other people. And producing stuff on that could be helpful to getting yourself known. One of the bigger ideas I had yesterday is in terms of creating like a bucket that funders can put money into that then can be dispersed to a body of work where people are all kind of sharing a perspective or a set of values or something like that. So instead of funders having to get to know individual people and buy into particular pieces of work, if it was like, this is the sociologist abolition research network pot, then they could put money into that, and then people who actually know what's going on can figure out how to disperse it. So that's one thing to consider, particularly, if there's a vibe in this room and people are excited to be together, maybe that's something to build on. I also think that creating a way to exchange with the field can be good. How can you share what you've got, and how can you learn what people need in a more like systematic way? Because otherwise it just depends on people having individual relationships to request or share that information, and a lot of those relationships don't exist. I also think connecting your students together might be interesting to consider. I also have some thoughts on some helpful research. Potentially, one thing I really want to highlight from yesterday is helping us understand the opposition better. I think a colleague over here had mentioned that that's something, the gaze is towards the vulnerable versus the, oppressor. From a political organizing, power building perspective, that seems kind of really interesting. Like getting more handholds in how to talk about or engage with, or frankly, exploit the vulnerabilities of the opposition is useful stuff. I also heard about, I think you were sharing yesterday about the $1 million police program that totally didn't work. That feels very useful in sort of making the case for the types of changes we're talking about. I also really was interested in the Du Bois-Davis conversation yesterday around tensions and abolition. And that's something I think that we don't hear a lot about. It's kind of a mishmash of ideas. And again, I feel like that's some of the stuff that you might just be able to like rattle off because of all of the reading and study that you've done, but kind of distilling and synthesizing that. I can imagine some sort of simplified articles. I don't know if this is how you work. I'm just saying like this is the kind of thing that could be really useful for us to have. So that's all. I'm out of time. This is the Substack. That's me on Twitter. I mostly just repost stuff. But thank you so much.
Good morning. So to those of you in the room and anyone watching on the streamed version of this conference, I just want to say how energizing and thought-provoking yesterday's and this morning's sessions have been. Energizing, thought-provoking, and I know we all intend action-oriented. I want to tell you about the Annie E. Casey Foundation, our mission, and how we and our grantees do our work. And I'll venture into philanthropy and grant-making foundations beyond Casey a bit more generally, but with the major caveat that if you know one foundation, you know exactly one foundation. And then finally, there are some threads and themes from yesterday and this morning I want to connect with. As I do all of that in 14 minutes or less, let me try to be useful to all of you, noting that most of you are university-based researchers, scholars, or scholar activists. And many, but not all of you, are relatively early in your career stages. I'll start by saying it seems exciting to be you. And I mean the creativity, the passion, the conceptual sharpness, the methodological commitment you've been sharing with us, these are inspiring. And each of you, in one way or another, you define yourself as being in the business of speaking truth to power. Where there are challenges or risks associated with that, you seem to be doing it with your eyes open and your moral and professional missions as your guiding stars. And then there's the fact that you're doing it in community, an intentionally constructed community that John and others described yesterday, to sharpen each other's ideas and research approaches, to shore up courage and resolve, to collectively carve out space within academia and the broader research and policy spheres for the conversations and lines of inquiry you are pursuing. It is important stuff, so I congratulate you and I'm here to encourage you. Frankly, a 27 or 37-year-old version of Steve Plank was sort of seeking and not knowing how to find an analogous community. So don't take that as a sob story from me. My life, my professional journey have turned out well, But there was some floundering, there was some searching in the wilderness where a set of co-travelers similar to you would have been awesome. But enough about me, enough about you. That's humor, okay? Let me tell you about the Annie E. Casey Foundation. You should call out humor so people know what they're experiencing. All right, the Annie E. Casey Foundation. We are a private philanthropy based in Baltimore with offices in Atlanta as well. Our grant making and other activities focus on building a brighter future for the nation's children, youth, and young adults. Our programs and investments focus on making sure all young people have the family connections, relationships, communities, and educational and employment opportunities they need to thrive. We seek to advance racial equity in all that we do because we know that children and families of color often face the greatest barriers to success. We have 5 grant-making units. I lead the one focused on research, evaluation, evidence, and data. Rod Martinez is another proud and excellent member of that team. Other units focus on strong and thriving communities, economic opportunity, strong families and permanent connections, and on the policy reform, advocacy, leadership development, and strategic communication that is designed to take evidence-based, data-rich, iteratively refined solutions to scale. Where I said strong families and permanent connections, that includes our connections to child welfare systems and juvenile justice systems. Systems improvement, systems reform, but also, very importantly, prevention and diversion strategies so that young people and their families don't need to have deep-end involvement with these systems. Investments in strong and thriving communities, investments in education, career readiness, and economic opportunity, investments in strong and thriving families. Those are the points of entry for where Casey's mission overlaps with all of the themes of this conference. In the coming days, if you're curious, I don't have slides, but I can share all these details and links with you. I encourage you to read a blog that we, aecf.org, posted just on March 26, 2024. Look for the blog title, Learn the Basics of Juvenile Justice. During the 2 days of this conference, it seems we've been talking mostly, though not exclusively, about the adult justice system, the adult criminal legal system. At Casey, we certainly pay attention to juveniles charged or sentenced as adults, and we pay attention to how the experiences of parents involved with the criminal legal system affect both them and their children. But the majority of our justice-related programmatic work, research, policy, and advocacy focuses on the juvenile justice system. So that March 26 blog, it has 12 or 13 really good links to other resources from the past several years. Among them, Juvenile Detention Explained, an examination of youth detention gaps by race and place, deep dives into diversion strategies, restorative justice, and transforming juvenile probation, 8 principles to transform care for young people in the justice system, reducing over-reliance on youth incarceration, effective alternatives to confinement, and specific ways to get involved as an advocate for change. I'll be honest with you, you're not going to see the word abolition written across our strategies, publications, and toolkits, but you'll see a strong commitment to shrinking the footprint of confinement. You'll see an acknowledgement that young people do, naturally, as a part of adolescent and human development, test boundaries and sometimes try on identities that society has called deviant. Young people do sometimes cause harm and make mistakes. People or communities who have been harmed have rights, and harm should be acknowledged. But past and current ways that society and systems respond leave a lot to be desired. We need to move away from a culture of surveillance, punishment, and confinement, and toward more developmentally appropriate responses, including options that keep kids away from the justice system altogether. You will see from us and our grantees attention to the problems of disproportionality in surveillance or police and court contact. None of us should equate rates of system involvement with rates of deviance or law breaking. We all know the story is more complicated and troubling than that. I want to mention one more example relevant to this conference. Look for a blog on our website from December of 23 entitled Youth Lockup Facility Transformed into a Community Hub. That blog links to a 6-minute video, a really good one, on the transformation of a Harris County, Texas, Faith, I see you there, Harris County, Texas juvenile correction facility into a community hub. It's called the Opportunity Center. It offers classes in which justice-involved youth and the broader community can develop skills and build relationships. This video explains how the adaptive reuse of the building is part of a larger youth justice movement away from punitive approaches and toward options that promote accountability, positive connections, and meaningful opportunities to position youth for long-term success. When you watch this, you're going to see 800-pound metal doors cast aside, because that's what we don't want in this building. That's not what this building's going to be for now. Other things we invest in through our juvenile justice strategy portfolio, through the READ, Research, Evaluation, Evidence, and Data group that Rod and I are part of, or through our policy portfolios. Other things include, you can write this down if you want or ask me later, ProData, a free tool for making data-driven decisions in youth justice. Look at our August of 23 blog, keyword pro-data, ProData. See whether this data and data visualization tool would be useful to you, your community partners, or the advocates in your life. CJARS, the Criminal Justice Administrative Record System. It's housed at the University of Michigan. We're just one of their funders. We see value in this joint project of the U.S. Census Bureau and the University of Michigan. Their assembling of person-level data from jurisdictions all across the nation is a unique resource, including for the research agendas many of you pursue. This is the first nationally integrated research data repository that follows individual trajectories from arrest to charge to disposition to sanction. We at Casey would be thrilled, beyond thrilled, if a growing and ever more diverse and inclusive set of researchers, journalists, advocates, and others were engaging these data. Rod or I could tell you more. You might be interested in the individual level data and the ways it can be linked to a range of social, economic, demographic, and administrative records. Or you might be interested in the Outcomes Explorer that this CJARS team is about to release, a new online user interface and data visualization tool for understanding the scope and impact of the criminal justice system in the United States. They say criminal justice system. I recognize and respect that many of us prefer to say criminal legal system. So, what are my bits of advice or inside baseball knowledge as any of you are seeking to understand philanthropy and grant-making foundations better? I want to demystify the world of philanthropy if it feels difficult to understand and navigate. I spent 19 years after my doctorate as a university-based researcher and faculty member, and then 1 year in federal government and 5 or 6 years at the nonprofit research firm American Institutes for Research. And all of that is to say I've put in my time pursuing grants and contracts to support research and evaluation projects. And I know firsthand that the process of seeking funding from philanthropy tends to feel quite different from responding to an RFA or an RFP from a federal agency, or preparing a proposal for a grant competition run by a professional association, or seeking a contract from a federal or state agency. So first, some things about Casey, and then about navigating and interacting with philanthropy more generally. The blunt news first. The Annie E. Casey Foundation does not accept or review unsolicited proposals. For the vast majority of grants, our staff will approach an organization directly and invite them to submit a proposal. Occasionally, we solicit applications for a targeted project through an open call for proposals. Also, I want to set your expectations by characterizing us as a medium-sized grant maker with a US-based mission. I cannot have you thinking Steve Plank and his immediate colleagues have grant funds available for 30 or 40 of you in this room, or 500 of you on the online conference. That is just not our reality. But if that's the blunt news, then I have more encouraging thoughts also. We do want to be in conversation with research teams exactly like yours and the network of people and communities you're connected with. We're all in the human and community well-being business. We're all in the data-rich and evidence-driven improvement business. My most direct advice is to be in conversation, be in relationship. For whatever foundations you'd like to know and explore, attend their webinars and events. Surf their websites and follow them on social media. Make in-person connections with program officers and other staff at conferences and convenings. Know that most foundations do have strategic priorities and points of view. We're not neutral or agnostic on strategy. So explore the overlap between a foundation's priorities and your research and policy directions. We, Casey, may not accept unsolicited proposals, but conversations and exchanges of ideas, initial relationships, exchange of ideas, that's how we get things started in my professional world. And if one foundation is not in a position to fund you, we really do see it as our professional duty and desire to make introductions to our peers in other organizations or other funding opportunities that we think might be a good match to what you're pursuing. So in brief, review websites and other public-facing materials on mission, vision, and funding priorities. Make connections with program officers, portfolio managers, and senior leaders via conferences and webinars and more. Expect that we in philanthropy, demand that we in philanthropy should be welcoming and transparent in our interactions with you. You know, we're entrusted with resources that should benefit society, hard stop. Know that philanthropies differ from one another in their practices regarding regular rhythms of requests for proposal, requests for applications, whether they accept unsolicited proposals or only by invitation, and the specifics of a foundation's prioritized funding areas. In any case, please do not hesitate to initiate the conversation by email or phone or otherwise. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Yep, thank you, Jantel. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Yes, I believe the email instructions you received, we just wanted to get to know your foundation a little better, and both Chloe and Steve have already talked, and we'll have you join in with them for Q&A, but we'd love to hear more about what you're doing and major priorities you see. I hope you've been able to peek in on some of the sessions and be able to relate some feedback to what your mission is based on what you've seen here as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to do so. And good afternoon, everyone. Really good to be here. Grateful for virtual technology. Had a little one that had a very bad sports injury and underwent emergency surgery. So still on the West Coast. Wish I could have been in person, but grateful to join virtually with you all. Jantel White, I am with the SHOT Foundation. I serve as our Senior Vice President of Programs and Advocacy. I oversee our various grant-making portfolios and programmatic initiatives. It's a real privilege to be in community with you all. I come from a nonprofit space, having worked in racial justice advocacy for a number of years here in Los Angeles as well as within New York, a bit of local government as well with mayors and the local school districts. Before joining academia, my PhD in sociology from Columbia. So grateful to be in community with folks, my colleagues in philanthropy. The SHOT Foundation is about 30 years old. We have a large our history within the Northeast, but we are a national intermediary foundation, which means we subgrant and also raise from our colleagues with a focus. Our theory of change and grant making is really to provide or increase, accelerate education and racial justice movement building, and to really create loving systems that advance students' opportunity to learn. So we think about that opportunity to learn and the system around learning as in and outside of the schoolhouse. So we think about health indicators, economic indicators, housing indicators that all inform students' well-being. and their ability not only to access high quality education, but also to and through the various schooling experiences. So our focus in that, we fund Black and Brown led grassroots organizing nationally. We have folks that are at the local level, regional, and statewide leading campaigns. They vary from fighting school voucher fights within North Carolina, fighting for mental health supports and against punitive school discipline and punishment within Mississippi, Louisiana, Rhode Island. These are just some of the states that we represent. They're winning transportation and economic justice fights within New Orleans. They're getting out the vote in indigenous communities within California and throughout the West. They are largely both youth and parent led organizations. And we think about this as a vital part of building our multiracial democracy. These are the front line. We believe that those closest and experiencing the problem are also the arbiters of the solutions. And so we are very proud to invest in those at the front lines and ideating and advocating for systems change. Many of our grantees are fighting from a liberatory frame, and many have an explicit abolitionist frame in their work, that this idea of a system being reimagined in order for everyone, regardless of their race, sexual orientation, economic status, gender, the system must be reimagined in order for all of us to be truly free. And so our principles as a foundation are really to be community centered in our work, both on the grassroots organizing pillar. But also, I want to go back to our theory of change is really fostering loving systems that advance students' opportunity to learn. So we have also narrative change programs, as well as a research collaborative through which we all are focused on how does this help us advance loving systems for students. So particularly our narrative change work is our public school grad initiative that really is focused on fostering greater attention around the brilliance, around the beauty of public education and those students and alumni, educators as well. And so this is really building the base of folks that are at the front lines of experiencing public education, encountering a lot of the negative narratives that we see so often clouded around the classroom. On the research side, which is obviously of greater interest to many folks, our grassroots research collaborative is really an effort to bridge what our grassroots organizations are looking for in terms of data support. So there are commission reports that the foundation develops to most foregrounding our Loving Cities Index, in which I'm happy to share these materials as well. They're also linked on our website. But we look across a number of cities, usually about 15 in each iteration. We're currently under the third now and looking for vendors to support this work. But it's a way to, based on our framework of about 4 areas in which we imagine a loving system around economic, around health, around education, that we really are thinking about how well is this city performing in terms of its way to serve students. And so the report really goes down the list in sort of rating the current indicators and how they shape students' opportunity to learn in those various cities. That is one in terms of a commission report. The second is our Black Males in Education report. And so we look at some of the top most in metropolitan areas, the districts, public school districts that have the largest numbers of African American students, and really drill down in terms of the performance of Black males within those locales. And so we will have the latest report, actually, it's being released in a couple of weeks. But those are 2 of our commission reports around education that really highlight some of the recent data that serve as, again, a tool for our grassroots partners in advocacy in their locales, but also in terms of policy shifts and change. The second is that as an intermediary, we are also not just focused on funding, but also focused on shifting philanthropy. So we think about the reports as also opportunities for ourselves and our colleagues to identify the opportunities for more investment. Where are we seeing opportunities to dive deeper into support for education and public education in and outside of the classroom? The other is in terms of our policy collaboratives. I mentioned those as some of our commission reports. The other is data sheets. And so these are areas of which our grantees and in community with our grantees, we've identified needs in terms of really zeroing down on the key data metrics. So a number of states in which we work, looking to sort of have state level analysis around those various indicators, broken down by race, gender, et cetera. This might be in terms of school discipline, it may be in terms of suspensions, a number of various indicators. So we are constantly in community and looking to further our networks with scholars that support these efforts. Great to follow both Steve and Chloe, who kind of laid the groundwork in terms of how do we engage, tips for engaging philanthropy. We as a foundation typically offer, most of our grants are operated in terms of invitation. And so really +1 in terms of the real value add of being a community, whether through conferences, attending events, meeting with various staff members, this both for SHOT and across philanthropy, would definitely recommend that as an approach, particularly for those within the social justice philanthropy space. I mentioned the number of reports that we as a foundation publish and various data sheets, if you will, state level data sheets. But this is ongoing. So our mission to really advance movement building for our partners, we are in constant community about what are opportunities they are seeing and identifying. And in that, being in community and conversation with scholars that, are working around school discipline, are working in Mississippi or have, connections is an immediate through line so that we can begin to build out. The other aspect of it is within our grassroots research collaborative, we have a table of about 16 organizations across labor, advocacy, and even philanthropy. UNIDO's National Urban League, the various organizations across the nation, they're national membership organizations, of which we convene to really collaborate on state and federal policy actions. And in that table, as they're convening, there are opportunities for scholars to be a part, to share their work, as well as to support in the synthesis or analysis of some of the actions coming out of those tables. So that's another area that for SHOT constantly looking to engage in scholarly work for folks to be a part of that table. On an ongoing, there are also opportunities in terms of the various events and panels we hold with our grantee partners. And so whether webinars or conferences, those who have expert knowledge in those various areas aligned with their work, to provide that support and to be within our network of folks that we can really lift up to speak to those various areas. I'm going to pause there. I hope that kind of gave an overview both of SHOT and the opportunities research-wise that we currently are engaging around and ways to be in conversation and make overlap with some of the interests here. But again, good to be in conversation and happy to continue on.
I want to thank the panelists. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, I was going to ask about the lighting. So I don't know how we're going to do with John Tell speaking, but I'm sure you've done this before. So they have us in the booth. So thanks, John. I want to start with what I've been amazed at with every other discussant. I'm now like, oh, this is way harder than I thought it was. But I could try and summarize everything that was just said, but I think it was so much new information, especially given the more junior researchers that are dominant in the room, and I'm trying to encourage you all, which is antithetical to your ultimate goal, many of your ultimate goals, which is tenure, right? But I'm trying to, some of you are more on the cusp about to get tenure, but I'm trying to, as a group, have us start to think about how to move this way, where you may not have to be the PI, you could be a co-PI, and start building relationships now, because I'm from Chicago, right? I'm from Chicagoland, more generally, Evanston specifically. And one thing I always, people who have seen me and heard me talk before, one thing I always try to do is I don't like to talk about it. I like to be about it. And if we're talking about abolition and social justice and reforms, or even revolution, however you want to take this, you shouldn't be just saying or advocating for it. What I love about our panelists is even Steve, who says Casey isn't directly about abolition, whereas Chloe and Jantel say, no, we're more directly into funding grassroots activities, right? Which can lead to, seeding the groundwork for abolition. I think that this panel was very exciting for me because I'm a recovering community organizer, right? I left community organizing to come into the academy because in the late 90s, when I was doing grassroots community organizing and political organizing as well, there wasn't much connection with the academy. We didn't have research. What did you call them, Jantel? I'm sorry, got to put my glasses on. It's the old man move. Data sheets, right? And that's ostensibly what Chloe was asking for, right? While you may provide them at the state level, it sounds like we need them maybe for foundations, right? But I left community organizing because there just wasn't enough strategic thinking about how not only to go after funding, but even how to grapple with some of the larger issues, right? I was dealing with small issues that were more neighborhood focused. We were in the process of building a metropolitan organization, and those growing pains, which a lot of NGOs go through, they can teach a lot. But I felt like I had more to give. That's why I came into the academy. I went to get an MPP. There's not a whole lot of us who go and get a professional degree first and then a PhD. So I have an MPP and a PhD because I wanted to figure out the best way to research issues, the best way to bring equity and foregrounding equity. That's why I'm a sociologist. I didn't go into econ because policy is made out of the two building blocks of, and this is no offense to economists, right? No offense. Macroeconomics, stats all day. I did that. I've lived that life. No offense to, nobody asked you, Siri. No offense to economists, but economists focus on efficiency. I think the strategic, what sociologists can bring to the table is an understanding, a better and deeper understanding of equity. We're supposed to, when we intervene in policy, we're supposed to talk about equity and efficiency. Economists just discovered inequality like in the last 3 to 4 years. They're just thinking about subnational inequality, right? And that's no diss to the field, but they're acting like oh, it is. But yeah, it is. But there's no diss to a lot of social scientists doing this work. But how do we produce research that is actionable, right? Things that we really care about, and it can't all be quantitative. So that's why I want to turn to the panelists, because I think that I have a couple of questions I can ask. I've given you more of what's even brought me to this point. where I was, what is that, over 20 years ago? This is how old I am. So what brought me into grad school and everything else. But I think some of the questions that were raised, I'll just ask each of you to respond to one or two questions I have. So for Chloe, you talked about buckets for bodies of work, which I loved. And as a former organizer, I love the fact that you talked about basically producing a power analysis, which means you know the jungle that you're entering, right? So how do you exploit the vulnerability of the opposition? That question. If you wanted to engage with us a little bit more to explain that a little bit more, how could research specifically exploit the vulnerability of the opposition? What are some ways researchers could potentially do that that would be meaningful for where you're sitting? How could we produce something that's meaningful for where you're sitting? And I'll let you, well, I only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask Steve and then Chantel a question as well. So for CJARs in particular, because you are a PhD, Steve, I have a similar question. Are there ways that CJARs isn't being used that you've seen could potentially be used from what's in here? I have some things in my head. I'm thinking about my undergrad researchers. I need to acknowledge two of them that have come in today, Emma and Hans as well. I'm thinking of Emma and Hans, well, Hans in particular, who's been looking at some education outcomes. Yeah, we need to familiarize him with CJARs for some of the work we're doing. But how do you think CJARs could be used based on what you've seen here? And lastly, for Chantel, your theory of change, I got really excited because I was like, yeah, if this was around in 1998, I know the Shop Foundation's been around for a while, but you weren't at the Shop Foundation then. So if the Shop Foundation was doing this in 1998, I might not be a professor, right? I think a lot of how you talked about making data useful for your partners. So I want you to talk a little bit more about how the role that SHOP plays in connecting researchers to your NGO partners, or what role does SHOP play? Do we as researchers already need to have connections with state and local governments or NGOs, right? And then we come to you that way because you don't accept unsolicited proposals? How exactly does that process work? So I appreciate each of you responding to those questions in any order, and then I'm going to ask Hans and or Emma, whoever is doing the mic, to pass it around. Oh, and if folks have to leave, I know a few folks will be traveling. Make sure to get some food so you can't say Brown didn't feed you. Pack lunches on the way out. So Hans, I'll hand the mic over to you, and I'll let Chantel, Chloe, and Steve answer the question.
Thank you so much. I realized that hearing my colleagues speak, that I'd kind of failed to give a big important point, which is that my pure specific focus is on ending mass incarceration. That's what I've done for almost 20 years. So all of the funding work and all of the advising and all of the kind of analysis and strategy is all really focused on that. So wanted to make sure to put that out there. So how to exploit vulnerability? I would first say that why do you want to exploit vulnerability? So you have a background in organizing. For others in the room, kind of thinking about the ecology wheel that I presented to you before, each of these components kind of can, if working together, create opportunities for other components to kind of step into. So for example, just to take a kind of small basic one, or a bigger one, we all lived, 2020, mass mobilization, 25 million people in the streets creates what we sometimes call heightened the contradictions. It created a lot of pressure for people to act. And then it comes to the organizers who can sharpen a particular set of demands, which don't come out of mass mobilization, by the way. I'm going a little off track, but I feel this is an important point. A lot of people will critique Occupy or Me Too or Black Lives Matter. What are your demands? That's not their job. The job is hugely increase, or their effect is increase public salience, conversation, really move the Overton window. But the shaping of particular demands comes down to these labor organizers, community organizers, advocates, people who have a particular structure and a constituency that they can point to and speak on behalf of and say to the inside game, this is what we need to see happen in order to respond to all those people out there on your steps. If you want them to calm down, do these things. Now, the things will never be as big as the mass mobilization demanded, and that's another longer conversation. Okay, so when we have a big public movement on this, you got a lot of leverage going into the inside game and saying, pass these things. And they're like, how fast? Let's do it. Let's get everyone to calm down. When you don't have a lot of people in the streets, you're dealing in more kind of normal back and forth politics, where the types of players we're talking about, like police, associations or unions, corrections unions, prosecutor associations, these retailers associations, these different bodies have political presence and power because they, have strong lobbying. The LAPD and sheriff between them have, I think, 57 full-time PR staff. Full-time PR. We don't have that many, brilliant communications people across the whole country working on this issue. They have that in Los Angeles. So I think we're doing pretty well given, considering those circumstances. So when you're up against that, and you're in the public space, maybe you're at a council hearing or you're, back and forth in the media, it can the way that the research can be helpful is equipping the people who are in the mix, who are helpful electeds or who are trying to be allies or organizers or advocates or helpful journalists or whatever, quickly and sort of compellingly respond with useful stuff. So one example of this might be, I haven't watched it with these eyes, but I really encourage you all to check out a recent Breakfast Club episode, the podcast, it's on YouTube. Olayemi Olurin, who's a grantee of ours, went on the Breakfast Club, and I don't know how many people are watching it, so I'll just say it was a wonderful experience to watch her engage with Mayor Adams, and she brought so much. She was so prepared for this debate, but when you realize what she is pulling from, when she's like, boom, 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 you did this, you did that, or here are the implications, or here are the stats, the content of that, a lot of that would be the type of work that people like you are creating. That's what you're sort of equipping of the Alayamis of the world with that kind of ammunition. Now, it can be funny to think of years of work being reduced to like a quick kind of soundbite, but at the right moment, it actually can, in the right hands, it can really turn things around. So there's longer conversations than just that quick sparring, but that was a pretty significant. I really encourage you to watch. It's a very, very enjoyable interview to take in. But in longer sort of engagements in these like public policy spheres, when, again, legislators or decision makers are uncertain or whatever, or community leaders or faith leaders, business leaders, different people are like, I'm not sure, what do you think? I mean, it seems like this is true, right? But if you heard, well, we did a careful analysis and this $1 million extra program did nothing, that's helpful to have in your pocket when you're engaging and trying to push back and say we should actually allocate more funding to these other kinds of places. So I think the vulnerability you're exploiting there is there's this sort of assumption that these actors have all of the data and research behind them, which they don't, and that can be revealed. And then they are sort of course, treated as the custodians of safety or the people that everyone should trust. And so developing research that helps show that that is not necessarily the case can be helpful. And then the second thing I really just have to say, again, from an organizing perspective, these institutions are not monoliths themselves. So there are people within them who may feel a different way. So maybe this is for the ethnographers in the room, lots of police officers. We heard yesterday from someone who was speaking to retired corrections officers, I believe, who had a really rough go. Telling more of those stories, the people participating on the other side are having a really bad time. Less about creating sympathy and more about kind of breaking down this notion of just the bastions and custodians of safety and law say this. Well, actually, they say a lot of things. We could hear a lot more of those stories and understand that more. We could hear why there's a 20 to 40% vacancy rate in many states and police departments and corrections departments, because they all think it's a terrible job, it's abusive, exploitative, they don't want to kill people in the street. Hearing more of those kinds of stories can kind of complicate the position of those types of unions, associations, or certain politicians in saying, obviously, we need to do X and Y in the minds of the public, of journalists, other electeds, and so on.
I'll respond to what you asked about CJAR's Criminal Justice Administrative Record System. And interesting that I'm really happy to be able to talk about that, a large quantitative thing, but it also gives me the excuse to say the range of types of data, types of evidence. We embrace a really broad range, and all the evidence debates that are out there. What counts as evidence? Who gets to declare what is valid or useful evidence? We actually love those debates and want to be part of it. We take stance for a very broad range, but then think about what evidence is needed at this stage of a project, this stage of understanding or action prompting. So let me just say, we take our stance for broad, but you asked me about a big quantitative one. A complement to what this CJARS is, I think anyone who tries to just understand the scope and contours of either the adult criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system, it's a patchwork of data not connected out there in these small jurisdictions and hard to get one's hands on. The University of Michigan team is making it happen, and it's rather amazing. They do position themselves as kind of not in advocacy mode, playing it straight down the middle, some button-down economists, and I say that without derision. I say that's what it takes to get the inroads and build the trust. So let's actually appreciate that. But there is plenty of room to go well beyond economists and the researchers who want to be in conversation with advocacy. This can and should happen. And the principal investigators, the funders of CJARS, are excited for this to happen. These 2 days, all this talk about prison booms and busts and closures and prisons, jails, detention centers, it's gotten my creative juices flowing, taught me some things I didn't understand. The way individual person-level records of confinement in a place can be linked to all of these other census and demographic and social data, and I think, someone will call me on this later if I'm wrong, you can understand what people are confined in a place and also where they have lived previously. We can understand at a time of a prison closure, I think we could do simulations or thought experiments about, depending on where that person is counted by the Census Bureau as it affects flows of federal and state funds. Okay, first, what are the implications of the status quo? This person is confined here but used to live in this zip code. What if we change the rules of how dollars flow? And if we're going to close this prison, what your Brown undergrad team has been thinking about, let's think next month, next year, next decade, how is this going to affect the community? It's just a resource to go even deeper with that thought experiment. I will say, expand the network of researchers. The CJARS data is currently being used by a relatively small number of researchers doing really good, careful studies. If we actively looked for researchers from HBCUs, if we actively taught journalists how to access and use these data, maybe not the person level data, but this new outcome explorer. So just expanding the reach. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Steve. Chantel?
Sure. So to this question of, how do we make the data useful for our partners? How do we, serve as this bridge between grassroots organizations and researchers? A couple of things come up. One, as a foundation, we really center a trust-based approach. So a large number of our grants, all of our grants to grassroots partners are under general operating expenses, so they're not, restricted in terms of that use. Many of our partners are multi-issue. We have a real anchored focus on education and racial justice, and so they are advancing education fights with also intersection with many others in their locales. And so with that, we are in, our approach is, it's fluid, and so to kind of give a direct answer, what does that connection look like? It's through organic intention, if you will, organically through our touch points with our partners on how, and let me also back up, in addition to being trust-based, we have a center for long-term investment. So we know that systems change, takes a while to shift, it takes a bit to steer the ship in a different direction. And so we are invested over several years with our grantee partners. In that, it is a constant touch point around what are the successes, what are the challenges. We have a really good rapport with our partners separate, and built over time so that there is a real deep, not only connection, but realistic reflection from them on pain points, on opportunities, on needs, that it isn't sort of, we have a sweet spot of them feeling comfortable to really give us the real. How can we really real, right? Like workshop what is necessary to get to this next level. And so with that, we are able to jointly identify it's this data, right? Like we are talking broadly, but don't have the time and space. I think that's the neat nexus of your position of being able to go deep and really broaden out what are the opportunities or what were the learnings from X thing, right, that you've studied. And so folks can come to us in different ways. It is through those touch points with our program officers that will come up through our grantee partners. Some have participated, in YPAR studies, and so their own participation or engagement with researchers through their organization or individually, and that mentioning up is how sort of we kind of build those connections, or direct needs, right? If our grantee partners are saying recently, the voucher fight, the governor of North Carolina, really expanding school vouchers and urgent campaigns being lifted up by grassroots partners seeking to protect and expand public funding for education. Data around that, building up, what are the stats around the school voucher fight within the state? Those are pieces of information that they do broadly, but knowing across the state outside of their particular school districts would be helpful in really, making the case. And so we will then, right, look through our network of partners, of scholars, right, who can help them in really answering the call and help them in the campaign. So it looks like that in terms of those touch points. What's the need? How can we, right, leverage our resources, given our position, to really help them in the effort and to keep them in the fight. The other is, through, again, under this organic intention, we're aiming to be more visible to you. Forums like this are helpful. Our president, John Jackson, will be at the American Education Research Association conference in a few weeks, and other spaces so that, as your work, a part of that, subsection, conclusion, recommendations often have policy focus, often have learnings and insights about organizations or individuals that will be helpful to surface. And so we want to also extend the door. We see less of it, but there is a need for it so that it isn't, isolated within academia, but those that are experiencing the work and that, directly would benefit to provide that forum. So we think about our connections, town halls, with our partners as spaces to really lift that up. Again, being in the fight, you don't always have the privilege to sit back and say, how did we get here? What is the best next step? What are the insights, right? And so surely it is done strategically, but there's a lot going on and you're thinking about the next wave. And so being able to really increase our knowledge about where researchers' findings are, what are their learnings, and being able then to kind of bring that back or just create a forum, right? So we have a biannual, every 2 years, convening across our opportunity to learn partners. And so you think about, spaces to have research really surface in the broad issues that our grantees are really engaging. So it's organic intention. It is largely through our communications with grantees and their needs identified that we will then begin to activate on particular areas. The data sheets is one example of that. One of our partners through the Education Law Center, who worked at the University of Kentucky. Currently, the Center for Transformation of Schools at UCLA is was commissioned for our Black Male Report to come out in a few weeks. So work at a particular center, your own findings, and reaching out and again to this notion of being in community so that you are sharing your work. It may not be a direct opportunity that exists and you see it on our website, but because for SHOT, we're in community and always looking for how we can support there may be a neat intersection and new opportunity just based on that meeting.
Thank you, Jantel. Had to move around a little bit during this session, but we have a couple of minutes left before I give closing remarks. Is Heather, I see Heather's hand. If you can get her the mic, please, Emma or Hans.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Heather Schoenfeld. I'm an associate professor of sociology at Boston University. And this was really, really informative. So I'm hopefully I'll articulate this question okay. So one of the things that I think may be frustrating for academics and researchers is that we would, I think, love to meet community organizations in this sort of touch point moments where they need data kind of on the spot or, you know, with a little bit of notice. But a lot of our research in academia moves very slowly. And that's partly because we're doing a lot of other things. As you say, we're teaching students, we're, you know, running academic programs and so on. And so our research takes a while, and we can't always sort of drop things, you know, our research to work on getting data to community organizations quickly. And so it's a little bit frustrating, you know, Chloe, I think, to hear you say that, I think all of you say that there aren't really forums, there aren't really ways that you're getting the knowledge that we're creating over the long term, right? So, you know, just for example, the question about, you know, who are the people who are sort of blocking reform and how are they doing that? You know, a lot of us in this room have been studying that for years, right? And the research is out there, and yes, it's published in academic journals, right? Which you know, I don't blame you for not reading, right? But the question is, you know, what are some ways in which, as academics, we can make our research more available to you? You know, are there new sort of structures that need to be built to allow for that to happen? And what you know, are there some ideas that you have that would be helpful in that regard? So that's for anybody who would like to answer. Thank you so much.
I have a thought on that, which is one is increasing the number of relationships between people in this room and people in other parts of the field. Understanding that we're kind of in different fields, but other people doing the work. So we, you know, I've talked to some of you, we may now have touch points. The more touch points there are, the more likely it is that people will have a conversation and be like, I need this, I know where to get it. So relationships are key. I think that I had one thought around, and this is, I don't know, pie in the sky-esque, but like, if there were all of the people in this room plus like 50 people that I could read, you know, or 20 people from this sort of work in the same place, we could imagine an exchange where you create the most basic, simplified versions of what you're talking about, like the 1 minute version, not the 15 plus 5 extra minute version, but the most simplified, like, here are propositions that we've been exploring. We can show you ABC, we found D, F isn't true, we're looking at this kind of thing. Like, then, you know, and then they can also say, we have been trying to show X or Y, or over the long term, not just like, I need it tomorrow, I'm talking to the mayor, but like, in, you know, there's a question that came up around, like in Los Angeles, how the relationship between evictions and contact with the criminal justice system. So people are interested in homelessness. If you look at the causes of homelessness, you will not see criminal justice system contact on any list that I've looked at anyways. It's gonna be poverty and, you know, all these other things. But when you talk to people, they're like, the reason people are getting bounced out of their houses is they or someone in their household has picked up a case and that has destabilized things financially, or the landlord threw them out. But like, they can't make that, there's nothing to draw on to show that. And so you can imagine, or maybe there is, we don't know what that is. So like, there's these sort of longer running questions where you're like, everyone's so focused on homelessness, we are actually a part of like reducing criminal justice system contact is a key piece of strategies to reduce homelessness, which the state of California is spending billions upon billions of dollars to do right now. So it's like, I think that creating opportunities to sort of literally come together and be like, this is what we know, this is what we want to know, and like see what comes out. I also do think that like, I don't know. I mean, I think that listservs can work sometimes, like just as a way to kind of be in conversation. Not always. Often they die, and that's fine. That's fine. But like, what is there a stopping point? You know, could there? I don't know. Is there? You can imagine like a platform, a communication device of some kind where people can say, hey, people in abolitionist sociology land, I'm calling you from, you know, criminal justice, like ending mass incarceration land. We have this question, or we have, you know, we're noticing this thing, or this thing is happening. Maybe someone wants to look at it. So that's, I do think more vehicles helpful. And I do think that like, finding ways to communicate your work, which, by the way, we may have read things that are drawing on your work. So not like there's no transfer of information going on. But I don't know to what extent you are accustomed to creating simplified versions of your work for people to draw upon. And if that's not normally happening, like that's maybe something to consider doing.
I'll add to that in terms of, and I definitely hear the notion of capacity, right? Being able to have your flow of various articles and things that you're working on and feeling like those are separate. The things to provide and share with various partners. I will also challenge that in that to the extent that making it be information accessible can aid, right, in your research flow, because the actual product is a different form. It's synthesizing and condensing the high level, and perhaps not even at the same style of analysis, right? So it's a different sort of pinpoint statistic, mapping it. I'm thinking about our data sheets particularly, that is, you know, just gathering that information from various pockets and synthesizing it in a short form. So I also want to just kind of offer that as it's an opportunity as well in advancing work that you're doing and not separate. It can be very integrated into it and also aid to this problem that or opportunity that we've surfaced around what is the way that we can increase this bridge across academia and community spaces. And because those spaces, those types of products is a middle ground, have a wider reach, tend to, in other spaces, even beyond the academic conferences, it can also aid the audience, right? Build up the audience in those spaces that folks can direct toward you. So I just want to put that as an offering in that the thought about it separate, definitely understand in terms of capacity, but there is an integration at times. The two spaces we're looking, you know, to build, I mentioned our convening amongst partners and opening that up both to philanthropy and potentially researchers that it can engage. So I think we have to build the spaces for scholars to participate within the community and vice versa. But it's still an area to build off of. There's a question in the chat to me around research-based films and the funding of that. I want to offer the arts as well. I often see, you know, documentaries where scholars are featured that are also opportunity to draw folks to understand your work. It is areas that SHOT has sponsored previously in terms of research-based films and other types of artistic modes. So offer that is also a way that those audience spaces, and we can kind of continue to bridge the various fields.
Thanks for catching that question in the chat as well. Steve, did you want to reply to this directly, or
I have an answer, but afterwards I'll tell you. We can go to another question.
We have time for one more, right? Nicole, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just want to push back on this idea, like listservs are insufficient. They're like way too small, and there's an enormous amount of critical scholars that are out there, like writing in the New York Times, talking to The Economist, Time Magazine. You said decreasing system contact. That's a jargon. That's called police. You could have a headline, a separate headline that says police create evictions, police create poverty. Decreasing contact is a euphemism for police practices, punitive ones. I think that more academics need to be trained in PR. And I will tell you, I have done more media around, let's say, prosecutor complicity in police murder. That's what that's called. Prosecutors enable police murder. I don't see many funders wanting to pick this up, because what it would take is a funding agency courageous enough to expose the police violence on a mass scale. And so what a lot of researchers have to do is choose. Do I water down a message and talk in euphemisms so that the funding organization will allow it? Or do I say what I think I mean? So I have a New York Times piece called Chicago's Racist Cops and Racist Courts, and I mobilized a decade's worth of evidence. Does anybody want to fund the additional research that comes with it? That's called quote unquote controversial. So I'm putting it out there because there's a lot of academics that are not focusing on listservs. They're really able to translate. The problem is the funders they worry about the blowback. And so I'd love for y'all to, while we're all here, please address that, because we're out there, but we're very much ignored by funders, not the media, not big media, right? Conglomerates, not Netflix documentaries, and not peer-reviewed journals. We're in all the spaces. The funders get nervous.
I would say that I think that
And I'm down 5-0.
that first of all, there was a great piece in the Intercept by Akilah Lacey recently on the DA of Minneapolis, who is prosecuting a cop, and for that is getting heavily attacked. And she sort of documented a lot of examples of this as part of these. One of the reasons why the progressive prosecutor movement is so vulnerable to sort of police pushback is because they are prosecuting some cops. And so there's interesting stuff there. But to your main point, I think that the type of funder who is going to embrace that perspective is a one who is less likely to fund research because they're funding organizing. Because traditionally we think of like research as
Findings. I just want to make that clear.
findings.
Yeah,
Sure.
not perspective. That makes it sound like a viewpoint, a subjectivity. This is like data.
Right.
Yeah.
I
want-
forgive me for misspeaking. I don't mean to characterize it like that. So I think that we think of data work because there are foundations who focus on data, and they tend to, I mean, there's a thing running together here. There are foundations who focus on data, and they tend to have a certain politic and an approach. And I think other funders see that, and they're like, I'm not like that. I'm over here with the organizers. We're not trying to, and I'm not saying that you guys are doing this, we're not trying to endlessly understand that there is a problem, which is what we may understand those foundations to be supporting. Is there a problem? Is there a problem? Is there really? Yes, there's a problem. So like, let's do something about it. And so then we turn our attention towards organizers, and I'm saying organizers more broadly, but also literally like people who are base building and leading these campaigns. And I think that research and data, certainly in my mind in the past, has been like, that's on this other category of problem understanding that I don't feel the need to like devote precious resources towards. So you might be caught in this spot in between. Like there are people with money or some kind of stewardship over money who are not at all concerned or afraid or nervous about the types of information you're talking about supplying, proving up. But their focus is really in a different part of the ecosystem. And so I think that like this may be this kind of subset of all of the people doing data research work. There's a portion that are maybe heavily represented in this room that are looking at it from, are proving up the, I'm trying to say perspective because I hear what you're saying, proving up the facts around police murder and so forth, but we've already kind of like put that category out of our minds. I mean, I'm speaking broadly. I can't like go into the minds of all of my colleagues, but I think that might be kind of what's going on in part. So bringing it back together is maybe, I think is relational though. Like, I do think that I would be very excited to be sitting in a room, again, that's this room plus 20 to 30 people from the field or 50 people. And just, and when I say the field too, I'm thinking about the field as I normally think about it. Whatever. Like getting people together who are working in these different components and sort of seeing like how to compose strategy together instead of sort of consigning people to different arenas that then get overlooked. That's one thought that I think that that's maybe part of the gap, and we could talk more after about how to do it.
I think this is, I did want to hear from Chantel and Steve, but I also know I need to say a couple of words before I let you all eat, and those of you who have your bags packed, let you grab your lunch. We also have cake. So there's all of those things. But I want to encourage you guys I'm hoping that Steve can stay around a little bit longer. Chantel, I want to thank you so much. You are a trooper for being here. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our panelists. I really appreciate you standing in from California, because I know it's only 9 o'clock there now too. So you came on early, and you had a kid with a major injury. So those of us who have had children, really, I really appreciate you being here. But I did want to close out by saying I started this meeting talking about creating a space, a sort of safe space in a way for the more junior scholars to also learn about the hidden curriculum, right? But I think it also, part of where I wanted us to end up was at this point, because there's only so long you can talk about it, right? Especially people who see themselves as abolitionists. I don't want to endanger your career or jeopardize your path to tenure. You need to do what you need to at your institution, if that's where you want to call tenure your home, because from there, once you get tenure, you wield more power, right? And when you wield more power and you can be a PI and you can get research funding, you can get funding for research, you can do translational work. And there are examples of translational work. I've been actually doing this for the last few years since I got tenure, taking some of my academic research, working with folks specifically at the Urban League now, where I have complicated, long 10 or 15,000 word publications boiled down into either a blog or Rodrigo Martinez is great. He's done I don't know how many white papers at the Urban Institute, right? So there are instances where you can do translational work, right? And that translational work can then be used to talk better, to talk more clearly with funders about a theory of change. So taking your research agenda, or what is called a body of work, this is all urban jargon, but NGO fields generally, the NGO field is generally using this. If you take your body of work or your research agenda, and then you can come up with a theory of change connected to it. Most of us have this already rumbling around in our head, but we have to speak in these very confined ways to make sure we get tenure, right? I was writing for my life for my first book because I kept moving. My son was here a little earlier. He's still mad at me, right? He's 22. He's graduated from high school. He's a graduate student. He's still mad at how many times I had to move in order to stay on a tenure track, right? So in spite of all his privilege, I still get crap all the time. But I'm bringing all of this up to say, because we make sacrifices. There are sacrifices we have to make in our personal life in order to advance our professional goals, right? And sometimes, especially more junior scholars, you are writing, and most of us in this room have been told, you're doing me-search in some way. And I'm going to bring us back to where I started with Ruben's gift of proximity, right? Our experience, our life experience, our struggles, our noticing, us noticing hurt and pain in our own lives and around others have driven our research questions. We can develop, as we've developed our research agendas or our bodies of work, we can also reflect upon those experiences as we start to do translational work. I really appreciate the tension. Nicole's always going to bring the heat. She's from Chicago. I think she's gang affiliated. I don't know which one she's claiming these days, but yeah, she's always going to bring the heat. I love Nicole for that. And Chloe, I appreciate all of our potential funding partners are the ones who have been here educating us allowing us to educate them. This was a great panel, a great exchange, and it was also a great day and a half. So enjoy your cake. Happy birthday, Sarah, and safe travels, everybody. Thank you.